Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Introducing Amazon Inspector. Before we begin, let's work through a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you can see a Q&A pod. Please submit your questions for our presenter and Q&A moderator at any time. We will address them in a live Q&A session in the end, as well as throughout today's presentation. There will be 3 poll questions at the conclusion of today's presentation, proceeding live Q&A. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will send you a follow-up email with a URL to the recording once we verify the recording quality, as well as a link to the presentation deck. And again, welcome to today's webinar, Introducing Amazon Inspector. Our presenter today is Eric Fitzgerald. Eric is an engineer in Amazon Web Services security team, helping to build both internally used security tools and security services that can be used by AWS customers. Today with us, we also have Justin Smith, software development engineer on AWS security team, who will engage with you and answer questions throughout the presentation while Eric presents. Eric, welcome. I now pass the floor to you.
Stand by for just 1 second. Eric, just click on the microphone icon once to unmute.
Sorry, guys. This is Eric from the AWS security team. I'm better at computer security than I am at operating webinars. But thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join our webcast. And today I'm going to tell you about a new service that we have launched in preview at reInvent this year, Amazon Inspector, which will help you secure the application workloads that you run on top of AWS. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Amazon Inspector and tell you about how we think of this service and what the key concepts are. I'm going to tell you what Inspector is. I'm going to walk you through getting started with Inspector through the steps that you need to do to actually get value from the service. I'm going to show you a little bit more advanced workflow using some features of the service. I'm going to give you a demo, and then basically I'm going to give you some resources and contact information and take any questions that you might have. I'm trying to get back to the slide deck, guys. So let's get started with concepts. There are 4 key things that you need to know about Inspector to be able to understand how the service works and what it's doing. The first concept is the concept of an application. So Inspector analyzes something that belongs to you that runs on top of Amazon Web Services. We consider this an application. This is a set of resources and EC2 instances that together accomplish some business value for you. You have to describe an application to Amazon Inspector in order for it to perform a security assessment for you and tell you any security issues that it might find with that. An assessment is an instruction to analyze your application. So in an assessment, you tell Inspector what application you want to analyze, what your security goals are, and you give it a little information for housekeeping purposes. And in return, you can run the assessment, and Amazon Inspector will tell you if there are any security issues with the application. Rules packages are sets of security checks that Amazon Inspector knows how to perform. Rules packages are composed of rules, which are security checks, and they're grouped in such a way that allow you to select a rules package to correspond with a security goal you might have, such as I want to assess my readiness for a PCI audit, or I want to see if I'm vulnerable to any CVE bulletins that are out there. And then finally, there's a concept of a finding. A finding is the way Inspector tells you that there's a security issue that you might want to pay attention to. A finding contains a detailed contextual description of what it found. It'll identify the rule in the rules package. It'll tell you all about the resource that it found the security issue with. It will describe the security issue in detail and give you links where applicable, for example, to CVE resources on the web. And finally, it will give you remediation step recommendations, how you can fix or mitigate this security issue. So together, these four concepts will allow you to understand what Inspector's doing and how to operate the service. So now let's talk about the big picture. Amazon Inspector arose from our own internal application security efforts. We have software that we write that both operates our own internal systems and also composes the services that we provide to our customers in Amazon Web Services. We have security engineers who are responsible for verifying that all of our security best practices are followed and that we are using secure designs and operational techniques. What we wanted to do is we wanted to automate some of the work that our security engineers do, and we wanted to make it available to our customers to help them secure the applications that they run on top of AWS. So many of you are familiar with the AWS Security Shared Responsibility model. If you're not, there's good documentation on it on aws.amazon.com/security. But basically what the shared responsibility model says is that AWS is responsible for the security of the infrastructure, and that you are responsible for the security of the applications and services that you write on top of our infrastructure. Amazon Inspector does not change the shared responsibility model, but it's our first service offering to help you meet your part of the responsibility for security. We designed Amazon Inspector to run during a continuous integration pipeline. If you guys aren't familiar with this, the current trend in the industry for writing software is that you'll have a pipeline where you'll introduce changes to your code, and then you'll have an automated build system that will build that code, perform testing on it, and if all the testing passes, it will promote it to production. We designed Inspector so that it can run during the testing phase of your CI pipeline. We don't recommend that you try to run Inspector continuously. And in fact, you'll find it difficult to do so because there's no option to run an assessment continuously and because we don't deliver findings until an assessment ends. So this is not a intrusion detection system. It is very much an application security vulnerability analysis kind of tool. We intended Inspector to be used against test environments. We want you to secure your workloads before you actually put them into their full production threat environment. And so that's how we envision that you'll be most effective with Amazon Inspector. And then finally, one of the things that we commonly get asked about is, are we a network scanner, or how do we find vulnerabilities? Amazon Inspector is agent-based. Our security sensors are all in an agent that you install on your EC2 instances. And then sensors on in the agent actually report telemetry to our service when you perform a security assessment. And we use that telemetry to analyze the application for security vulnerabilities. And just to hammer on this a little bit more, one of the things that confuses people is that many security vulnerability scanning applications are point in time. So there'll be an application that you run that attempts to connect to all of your hosts and perform a set of security checks and then proceed to the next host. That's not how Inspector works. It's also not continuous. It's not an intrusion detection or intrusion prevention system. It is a vulnerability scanner, but it combines kind of the best of both worlds. So during the beginning of an assessment, we actually collect configuration information about the hosts that the agent is installed on. And as soon as we finish collecting this configuration information, we start collecting behavioral telemetry so that we understand whether the application is behaving securely regardless of its configuration. And because we are actually looking at behavior, you'll get the most security value from Inspector when you actually are analyzing an application that's being exercised. When you analyze an instance that's just sitting idle, you'll get configuration-related vulnerabilities, but very little behavioral value. So now I'm going to talk you through how to get started with Inspector. And if you haven't already signed up for the Inspector preview, I'll tell you how to do that later. If you are signed up for the Inspector preview, you don't have to follow along right now, but most of what I'm going to describe is actually in the Inspector Quick Start in our documentation. And actually, there's some more information there about how you can cause specific assessments and so forth to exercise the system a little bit. So Inspector is only in US West 2, Oregon. So first of all, if you want to exercise Inspector, you need to get some EC2 instances in Oregon. Inspector does not currently work across regions. You need EC2 instances in Oregon. And again, the EC2 instances are going to be representative of an application workload that you might be running on top of AWS. Maybe you're running a website and you have EC2 instances running Apache or Tomcat or something. So that's what we're going to simulate. Ideally, you'll have instances that are actually doing something, but you can actually play with Inspector with idle instances. You just won't get as much interesting stuff out of it. The next thing you need to do is you need to tag those instances. So if you're not familiar with tagging, tagging is a feature that's available for most AWS objects, and it allows you to associate key value pairs of string data. You choose the keys and the values that you want to add, and you add them to the particular resources. And all you need to do is tag your EC2 instances with key and value names that you remember, because we're going to tell Inspector what those keys and values are, and that's how it's going to find these instances. And then finally, you're going to install the Inspector agent on the instances. Installing the Inspector agent on a Linux instance is really easy. You just run two commands. You run a wget or a curl command to download the Inspector agent, and then you run a sudo command to install the agent. And it's that simple. Then in the Inspector console, you're going to create an application, and I'm going to demonstrate all of this. And to create an application, you're just going to provide the key and value names that you use to tag the instances. You're going to create an assessment, run the assessment, and look at your findings. And this is all going to take us between 5 and 10 minutes to do. Then I'm going to demonstrate something interesting in Inspector, which is workflow. So when we actually get to Inspector and look at the findings that Inspector generates, you notice that the findings themselves have attributes. Attributes are like tags in that they're key value pairs, they're string information that you provide. But you can store little bits of metadata with these findings, and you can use that to create your own workflow with Inspector. And I give some examples here that you can have an assigned to value that you can have one of your engineers' name or alias in, or for default values you can have triage. And you can also have a status where you have findings that move through a particular workflow with various states. The initial state might be new, and then it might be assigned, working, and then resolved. And in that way, you can actually keep track of your findings and know which ones are interesting to pay attention to, which ones have already been taken care of. And the nice thing about this system is it's completely flexible and up to you. Our UI supports displaying any keys and values that you choose for attributes. And you can also interact with these programmatically to allow you to integrate Inspector into other security tools that you may already be using. So with that, I'm actually going to go into the demo now. So hosts, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Great. So in the AWS Management Console, you want to target Oregon. And then the first thing we're going to do is make sure that we have some EC2 instances running that we can assess. So I'm just using the standard AWS console. I'm going to look at some instances. I've actually already set up some instances because I was a little bit worried about time. And I just created a couple of tags on these. I created a tag called application with a particular value. And I'll look at this other instance, and it also has the same key and value pair. So this instance is already tagged, and I have already actually set up the inspector agent on these. I'm not going to bore you by demonstrating that at the command prompt, but were you to run those two commands, you'd see that we downloaded a file and ran an install and got a success message. Now we're going to go to the inspector dashboard. The first time you run Inspector, it's actually going to take you through a wizard to help you get started. And so I already have a role for Inspector. If you don't have one, it's going to ask you to create the role. The role will actually allow Inspector to look up your EC2 instance tags in order to find your EC2 instances. I've already tagged my instances, and I've already installed the agent, so we can go to the next step. Now, it's going to ask me for an application name, and I'll call this the webcast demo. And if you recall, the key value pair I used was application, and that was the value I used. And now I've defined my application. It's very simple. It's a name, which is displayed in the Inspector UI, and then it's a set of tags. When we actually run an assessment, Inspector will actually look at all my instances and look for any instances that have any of these tag key value pairs. This is an or, not an and. So if any of the tag key value pairs are matched, then the instance will be in scope for the assessment. Now we're going to create an assessment, and we'll call this a webcast demo assessment. The next thing you do is attach one or more Inspector rules packages. And if you recall, these roughly correspond to security goals. So I'm just going to pick all of the rules packages. And I think we're going to simplify this user interface a little bit in the next month or two. And if you recall, an assessment has a duration. And I'm going to choose a short duration. We're not going to run this assessment for 15 minutes and make you wait on the webcast. The final page of our Getting Started wizard actually summarizes what we're going to do. Define an application, define an assessment, and everything looks good. And here's a reminder that you need to have the agent installed on all the instances. a common mistake that people make is they don't install the agent before they run the assessment, and so they don't get any results. So we're going to create the assessment and go ahead and run it. Now, while the assessment is starting, I'm going to introduce you to the inspector console a little bit. So the main page of the console is a simple dashboard that tells you what inspector is doing and what it's found recently. And so right now I don't have any, I haven't completed any assessments, and so I don't have any findings yet. And I've got one running assessment. And if we click on any of those, it takes us to the appropriate page filtered on whatever we selected. Or we can certainly navigate to the individual pages. And these align with the concepts that I told you about: applications, assessments, rules packages, and findings. So I have one application. This is the one that I created. And an interesting thing here is it will tell me which instances, when I'm looking at my applications, it'll tell me at any given time which instances match that application currently. And if I click these links, it'll take me to the EC2 console focused on that instance. When I look at my assessments, I see all my currently running assessments. I can expand this assessment, which is the one that I just started, and it's collecting data. I can see all the details about the assessment. I can show the agents that are being analyzed, and I've got 2 agents, and they're both collecting data, and this is how much telemetry they've received. And I can see a summary of the assessment here. What I am going to do is I'm going to stop the assessment early so that we can go ahead and see the findings. So when I stop the assessment, it immediately changes state. It's performing analysis right now. It has not generated any findings yet. We having any problems? So I apologize, guys. I walked through this demo shortly before the webcast and ran through it with no problems. So right now I'm actually having a problem with the assessment. Let's see what's going on. Oh, okay. The assessment is finally completed. And we have 16 findings. So as I mentioned, findings are inspectors' way of telling you that about security vulnerabilities that you might have in your application that you might want to resolve. So let's take a look at some findings. So in this finding, again, it gives me the full context: what application, what assessment was running, the start and end time, and so forth. And in this case, it found that I have an EC2 instance that's vulnerable to this CVE, and that's part of our CVE rules package. This is high severity, and this is defined based on the CVSS score in the CVE. And the description is provided here, and it looks like I'm running an old version of Open LDAP on the system that needs to be updated. And so the recommendation is to use the OS's update feature in the case of Amazon Linux, it's a sudo yum update to update the open LDAP package. And notice it also gives you a link to the National Vulnerability Database so that you can get more information about this particular CVE if you're interested. I'm not going to go through every one of the findings, but I'll show you some examples of some of our other findings. If we analyze against the rules package and we don't find anything, we won't just leave everything blank. We'll give you a finding that tells you we didn't find any potential security issues. And that way you know that we actually did complete the analysis and didn't find anything. And I'll show you an example of one of our security best practices. I've got an instance that allows root to log in over SSH, and we provide a description of the particular problem and a recommendation on how to fix it. In this case, to modify a config file and restart the SSH thing. And then finally, I'll show an example of a PCI DSS finding. So in this case, this instance may have problems when it's audited against PCI DSS. And in particular, requirement 1.1.6 says that you should not be using any insecure protocols. And in this case, we found that this instance was running an SMTP daemon with an open port. And the recommendation is to disable the insecure protocols. So this is just a quick example of what Inspector can show you. Now, I told you a little bit about workflow. So one of the things that you can do is you can actually add attributes. And so what I have done is I've gone to each of these findings and I've added attributes to it. And now in my Show Hide Columns menu, I can actually see those attributes. And a refresh will eventually populate all the values. It takes a little bit of time for our backend to populate all the values when you multiply select. But you'll see that I have assigned to in status now and can have a simple workflow. Another interesting thing that I could do is, of course, when I go to one of these assessments, I can change it to I can assign it to somebody in my workflow in that fashion. And I can actually, instead of having to bulk edit all of my findings, I can actually configure an assessment to do that for me. So notice what I did is I created a new assessment, and I just created this assessment by cloning the assessment I created earlier in the demo. I changed the name, and now I set the values, or set the attribute key and value pairs that I want assigned to any new findings. And so now if I ran this assessment, then the attributes that I manually added to the findings from the last assessment would be automatically added to any findings that were generated by this assessment. And that's the basic overview of Inspector. Now I'm going to switch back to my slides.
And as we're moving back to the slides, Justin, I just wanted to grab your attention. If you could direct your attention to the Q&A pod.
So as you're, we've spent a lot of time working on the inspector documentation. It's fairly comprehensive. So I know that as IT professionals, most of us are pretty reluctant to dive into the docs when we can just start clicking on things in the user interface. But our documentation is brief yet comprehensive, so I would invite you to take a look at that. I'd also like to tell you that everything that you can do in Inspector UI and more you can do through our API. Our API docs are all published on the web in the same place as our documentation. Our command line interface and SDKs are published as part of the latest SDK, and you can go to the links to get those. And the CLI in particular is really easy to use. So I would encourage you, if you have any light automation requirements, to try the CLI. And if you're trying to integrate Inspector into some larger security project, take a look at our API. It's pretty easy to see the findings we've generated and to display those findings in another context. And it's also very easy to programmatically create and run assessments. Before we get into the Q&A, I also want to refer you to our forum if you want support or have questions about Amazon Inspector. If you have a premium support account, I want to refer you to them. They are able to answer Inspector questions, and they escalate directly to our team. And then one quick support question is one of the most frequent support questions that we get right at this moment is people will install the latest version of Ubuntu. They'll get a ISO image or something from somewhere, and they'll install it and deploy it to an EC2 instance, and we won't yet have a agent built for that particular kernel. Our agent does have a kernel module, and it does have to be specifically compiled against every unique version of the kernel. So, so during the preview, you have to be a little bit patient, but we are working on automating that pipeline, and in the next month or two, you should see the agent for new builds of Linux appear very quickly. And then finally, if you have specific feedback, not support requests, but if you say, wow, I'd really like this feature, or this is cool, or this sucks, why are you guys doing it? By all means, please feel free to send email to Inspector Feedback. We watch that constantly, and we are definitely looking for input from our customers. Now let's jump into, I'm going to anticipate some of the questions that may already have been asked. And so here's the questions that I get most frequently. So when is our launch? When are we going to be generally available? And that's going to be early Q2 of 2016. I'm guessing April or May. Another question I get, what regions is a preview available in? Only Oregon. I get the question very frequently, is a preview going to be available in Northern Virginia? No, only in Oregon. At GA, we're going to be launching more broadly in a couple of regions in the United States and also in Europe and Asia Pacific. We're still working out the details on that, and so in the coming months, I'll have more detail available. We've had some people ask, well, can I work around this by putting an agent in one region and working against a service in another region? No, we're only looking up at the tags for instances for agents in the same region. What about pricing? Well, the preview itself is free. We haven't determined the prices for GA, but in general, it's going to be pay-as-you-go. The pricing is going to be based on how much you use. And it's going to be related to the value of the rules packages. So for instance, our security best practices rules package are going to have a relatively modest price, and things like PCI readiness are going to have a premium price, but those prices aren't set yet. Will we have a Windows agent? I saw that question scroll by early in the presentation, and the answer is yes, and that will be available at GA. Will we have support for other versions of Linux? Yes, right now we support Amazon Linux and Ubuntu long-term support, 14.04. Between now and GA, we'll be adding support for Red Hat and CentOS. A few more questions. Does running Inspector make me PCI compliant? No. So Inspector is not an approved scanning vendor, and we provide no warranty that we will make you PCI compliant. What we are doing is trying to help you identify issues that will cause you problems in your PCI audit so you can resolve them before you have an auditor come in and assess you. Can you write your own rules packages? Not for GA, but this is something we're very interested in and are investigating. Can you download and view the telemetry that we collect? Again, not for GA, and we're trying to figure out how we want to do that. And then finally, how do I sign up for the preview? And I've got a whole slide dedicated to that. So the short answer is go to this URL, and there'll be a very short form. Fill it out. The two fields that are most important are your email address and your AWS account number. If either of those is wrong, then you may not end up with access to Inspector. In fact, if your account ID is wrong, you will not end up with access. So make sure you get that, you get those two fields right at the very least. Every morning, we come in and we start processing the access requests that we got in the last day. And usually around 1 p.m. Eastern time is when the emails go out notifying you that we've added you to the Inspector preview. Right now, we've got a lot of capacity and we are well ahead of our demand. So, so we are approving pretty much everyone who did a valid registration, and we're doing it next business day. The exception to that will be that over the holidays, like over Christmas and so forth, we won't have people working. And on certain really high volume days, we aren't going to make changes to the system. So really close to the holidays, we might not be processing preview requests every day. And then finally, what is coming up for GA? What's the difference between what you're looking at now and what you're going to see for GA? Well, we're going to have more regions, Windows, Red Hat, and CentOS. I've already talked about that. We're going to have more comprehensive rules packages. So the rules packages right now are targeted at preview, and so we only kind of show you a sampling of the things that Inspector is able to do. We're working very hard on enhancing the level of coverage that we have in our rules packages and on potentially even adding new rules packages for launch. We're going to have enhanced reporting. So one of the things that we know that people need is when you perform a vulnerability scan, you want a record of here's what was scanned, here's what it was scanned against, and here are the results. And so we are going to have a report for each assessment that shows you what we found. Any security tool needs an audit story, and we are doing CloudTrail integration. In fact, my counterpart Justin here is working on that. We are going to allow assessments to be run multiple times, so instead of having to clone an assessment, once you get the configuration how you like, you'll just be able to run it every day and see how the findings change from day to day as you mitigate them. We're also working on SNS support, so instead of having to call if you're doing integration, instead of having to call our API and say, are there any new findings, in a polling kind of way, you'll be able to just subscribe to an SNS topic and receive updates whenever findings are generated. And this also in turn will bring support for SQS and Lambda if you're interested in either of those as automation stories. We also have a couple of other things that we may be adding as surprises. And everything here is subject to change. This is not a promise, But these are the things that we're working on. These are the things that are on our schedule that we're pretty confident are going to be in GA. And of course, your feedback makes a huge difference. So keep track of that email alias. If there's features that you want to see, let us know. If they're more important to you than features that we're working on, let us know that as well. We listen very carefully to our customers, and you guys help guide the service that we want to build for you. So again, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this webcast, and I want to invite you to try our preview and give us any feedback. And now I'm actually going to take a look through the questions and see if there's anything here that I can answer for you. So Russell asks, is there a FSMA rules package? No, there isn't a FSMA rules package at this time. So Sue asks that inspector requires libpcap as a dependency. Are we looking into packets? So no, right now we are not doing deep packet inspection. But it's something that we're considering for the future. So Greg asks a really cool question. Since Inspector is agent-based, does that mean that you no longer need to notify Amazon in advance that you're checking security? And the answer is that for inspector assessments, you do not need to notify Amazon in advance. Can I paste the link to the quick start? I'm getting that link real quick. Is Inspector available in Northern California? No, Inspector is currently only available in Oregon. It's not likely to be available in SFO or in Northern California at launch because one of our dependencies isn't satisfied in that region. But we will have an update closer to launch on what regions we will be supporting. Tom asks, I spoke about CVE. Can I talk a little bit more about the Amazon Linux AMI? So this is something that we're actually working through right now. So it turns out that Amazon Linux is based on Red Hat, and we have our own security alerts, Amazon Linux. I forget what the security bulletins are called, but it's ALAS is our acronym for it. So right now we're working on having Inspector actually consume the Amazon Linux security database as well as the CVE database from MITRE, which is now available on CIS. and we're actually trying to combine that information so that we get more comprehensive information for Amazon Linux. So Duke asks, is configuration data collected by Inspector Agent related to or is the same as what's offered by AWS Config? No, we're separate services with separate telemetry. We are actually working with the AWS Config service, and you will be able to monitor changes to your inspector configuration, changes to your applications and assessments with AWS Config. Stefan asks, when is GA? GA is probably going to be April or May. Sue asks a really good question. Why is a specific CVE not on the list of CVEs for vulnerability assessment? And the answer is that during their preview, this is also answered on our forum. We've gotten this question a couple times. During our preview, we're manually building the CVE rules package, and we're not doing it every day. We need to do a refresh on this. We're working on automation, but it's not ready yet. Also, we are in our initial CVE rules package, we only chose CVEs with a score of 5 or higher. I'm trying to make sure I get the answers in writing here too. Sue asks, how often do we update our CV database? Well, I kind of just explained that. Right now we're doing it manually, but in the near future it will be built in an automated fashion, and we're going to try and make sure that it's actually pretty refreshed. George asks, will we send logs to CloudWatch? No, we currently don't plan to send logs to CloudWatch. However, we will have CloudTrail integration in the next month or so. Duke asks, can assessment have multiple runs? So right now, no, but at GA, yes. So we are working on multiple runs per assessment, and that will be a feature that's available at GA. Fred asks, will there be an option to create custom scanning profiles? Not at GA, but we are very interested in this feature, and we're thinking about how we might do that. Mohammed asks, can we detect SQL injection attacks? Not with our current rules packages. But we are looking at building rules packages that are focused on like OWASP type top 10, and in which case we would be looking at injection attacks and XSRF and those kinds of things. Pedro asks, will there be future support for on-prem use? Yes, at some point. Tatiana asks, can you set assessments to run automatically or on a schedule? Right now, it's manual. So the vision that we have, so I'll tell you the vision that we have. What we would like is when you go into code pipeline, we'd love for you to be able to add a stage to your pipeline that says run an inspector assessment. You choose the application, the assessment from the drop-down list, and then every time the pipeline runs, it kicks off a new run of that assessment. So that's our vision. We won't have that probably at GA, but we're working towards it. And in the meantime, you do have to either trigger it manually or you can automate the run through the API. Just finishing up the answer to that. Is there an overlap with information from Trusted Advisor? So that's a great question. And the answer is, right now there's not much overlap because Trusted Advisor is mainly doing information about, or is mainly doing security by analyzing the configuration of your account and the settings of your AWS account, and we're looking at instances. However, we are having backroom discussions with the Trusted Advisor team. In fact, I'm meeting them in person next week. And we are looking at how we might enhance each other's services by doing data sharing. Now, that said, when we do data sharing, we want to make sure that our customers remain in control of their own data. So we probably won't do anything automatically. We'll probably require you to opt in. Um, do, do we support Red Hat Linux? Not at the current time, but very soon. Can an assessment run start when an agent is down or not responsive? Yes, if there are other agents that are responsive, we can start an assessment with an agent that is down. If there are no agents that are responsive, then, such as you deployed the agents and then terminated the instances, then we won't be able to start an assessment. Is this only for EC2-based applications? Right now, yes, but eventually we will add on support. So will we have checks for NIST 800-66, HIPAA? And the answer to that is there are lots of different rules packages that we could write, and we are very interested in hearing what's most important to you. Several people have asked about custom rules packages and so forth, and the answer is we won't allow custom rules packages at GA, but we are looking very carefully about how we could allow partners and customers to create rules packages. Mona asks, why would I select a 2-hour assessment if the same assessment can be done in 15 minutes? Well, the answer is that if the assessment can be done in 15 minutes, then you should select 15 minutes. The length of the assessment should be around the time that it takes for you to fully exercise your application. Or, put another way, think of the time it takes you to run your integration test pass. And you should run the test pass while you're running the inspector assessment, and the assessment should end just after the test pass ends. So, so that's how you choose how long you should run an assessment for. So Justin asks, does this only scan things that have been actively run on the server in the time of the scan? So yes and no. The configuration capability scans everything that's on the assessment. But the behavioral piece will only see things that happen during the assessment run. So the reason that there's a duration of the assessment run and the reason that that duration is configurable is so that you can exercise the different pieces of your application, the different code paths and so forth, and make sure that if network connections are formed to, occasionally to this endpoint that you exercise that and so forth. Um, uh, and if you don't form a network connection or run a process during the duration of the assessment, then inspectors' behavioral rules won't see uh, that lack of activity. Glenn asks, can we scan RDS instances? Not at the current time. So Terry asks, do we also analyze AWS configuration? Right now, all our sensors are host specific and based in the agent. Although we are looking at things like partnering with Trusted Advisor and building server-side sensors, and we'll have more on that in the future. Since the findings are tagged, would it be possible to open up tickets or JIRA issues to address findings? So absolutely. Once we have, so I'll give you an example. Once we have SNS topic for inspector, you'll be able to subscribe to findings as they are created, and you could build some really simple automation that that feeds the assessments to an SNS top, or the findings to an SNS topic to an SQSQ, and you write a little piece of code that subscribes to SQSQ, opens a JIRA for each finding, and then adds an attribute for the finding with a link to the particular JIRA issue. And that would be, and we're considering, in fact, doing something very similar to that internally with our use of Inspector. So Sean asks, who created our rules packages? We did. Justin asked, so if you're using SSH on an instance, would it require somebody to log in via SSH to pick up SSH vulnerabilities? Not exactly. So if the vulnerabilities were configuration related, our configuration analysis would pick that up. If the vulnerabilities were runtime related and required the analysis of an SSH connection that was being formed, then we would only pick up those with a behavioral piece if an SSH connection was actually formed. But I'll tell you that our agent has a sensor for SSL TLS, where if we see a port 80 or 443 open, our agent will actually probe by doing a network connection to loopback and see which cipher sets are being used and so forth. And in that way, we can analyze whether you're using weak ciphers. I don't know if we do anything like that specifically for SSH. I'd have to look that up. And then I'll take one or two more questions. Leon asked, can I see his questions? And it looks like, yeah, the instance has to be in Oregon. We're not going to be available in Northern California. We talked about signature updates. We talked about web application rules. Last question. Russell asks, are we going to have FedRAMP support for GA? Not for GA, but FedRAMP is very interesting for us, and we're trying to see how fast we can get that done. So we're out of time. We're actually a little bit over time, but I really appreciate everyone joining today. And please take a look at Inspector. We're very welcome we welcome your feedback to our alias, and please feel free to ask any questions that I didn't answer on our news group. We do monitor our news group several times a week, and I or one of my peers will get on there and answer your questions, and I'll be happy to help out. So thank you, and I'm going to hand control back to our hosts.
Great, thank you, Eric. For the great presentation at his time, and also Justine for answering audience questions, we apologize that we cannot get to everyone's questions, but as Eric said, there's a few ways for you to get to the right expert on a team to answer your questions. So if you have any comments on our previous and upcoming webinars or suggestions to the topics you wish AWS may cover in future webinars, please feel free to email to aws-webcasts@amazon.com. Again, it's aws-webcasts@amazon.com. Your feedback helps improve our webinar programming. Thank you to our audience for taking the time to join us today. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.